Welcome everyone to another episode of this fantastic podcast. I am so glad to have you all back. My name is Jose and Xavier, your host. You know me, and it has been a while since we had our last episode. Yes, but Rose Company has been very, very busy with a few film projects. Yeah, we have Octopuses, and we also managed to gather some funds for our second short film called Brain, which is now in post-production. So thank you everyone who shared, liked, and donated to this really amazing project. But anyway, we have here in the studio Xavier Velastin from the UK. Yay! How are you, Xavier?
Yeah, I'm very well. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Just woke up. No, I'm kidding. It's been more than 3 hours now, but yeah. But anyway, thank you for being here. Thank you for accepting my invitation to be in this program. I'm really glad that I got more people interested in, sharing their experience and how theater and the arts overall are doing in the UK right now. But it's 2021, 2020 is over. So did we think that COVID and the pandemic was going to be over?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think I remember at the beginning, and people were like, "Oh, it's going to be over in autumn. That'll be over in autumn, and then we'll come back for Christmas." Or like, "Oh, I wonder if Edinburgh Fringe in August will still happen," and everything. And then it got to even July, and it was still just going crazy, and everyone was insane, and everyone was shutting down their borders and everything. And you're like, maybe that was optimistic.
Yeah, it was pretty tough. I also thought that everything was going to be over by May before my birthday, and that just didn't happen. No.
To be honest, I was very pessimistic about it, and I'm annoyed that I was right. But I was very pessimistic in that I was just like, this is going to take 2 years to get through. And annoyingly, I think it might be about that. Like, I think it's gonna, at least in this country, it's not going to get better until the end of this year. And then around the world, who knows? It's so different around the world, which is obviously part of what you're doing. But like around the world, everyone's responses to it, country-wise and personally, has been really different. And this is gonna be with us for a long time,
Yeah, and I mean, I'm currently in Mexico right now, and theaters and arts places, cultural places in here are also closed, even though you can still go to a restaurant, you can still go to a pub even. They close pretty early, but you can still go, but you cannot go to a theater venue to see a theater show. What is it like right now in London, in the UK?
It's all closed. I'm not actually in London, though, I would say. I have moved to Newcastle, which is in the north of England, just on the border of Scotland. I ran away because there was nothing happening in London. No, basically, I was me and my partner got we couldn't see each other anymore because there was the pandemic, and so and she had to move back to Newcastle, where she's from, because she also works in theatre and had lost all her work, so couldn't afford to live in London anymore. She had to go back home to her parents. So after a while, we were like, shall we just live somewhere cheap and just do that? So I haven't been in London for a few months now, but in general, everything is closed. Everything is closed. We've had bits of what the government here has done is do like little bits of opening and then closing and opening and closing and opening and closing. And we're currently in a full lockdown, and we've been since the start of the year. And that's going to go on till I don't know when.
It is indefinite. Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, I think they said the first time that they were going to look at it again was the February half term, which is when in here, like in between all the terms that kids go to school at, they have a kind of week's break in the middle, and none of the kids are in school at the moment, but they're going to go back at some point in like 2 or 3 weeks or something. So they're all going back then, and that's when they're going to have a look at that. But there's a lot of controversy and debate about that, even whether they're going to allow the kids to go back to school or not. Yeah. So obviously, along with that, like we're so far from theatres being open if they're not even letting children go to school.
Yeah, I mean, I know that they, as you said, that they open maybe a week in November. I know, because I read that on Twitter. I don't know if I'm wrong, but they did manage to open at least for 2 weeks last year. Yeah, and then they had to close again. I think this lockdown that you're going through is lockdown number 4, 3.
3. It's lockdown 3. But also here where we are, we never really came out of lockdown in Newcastle, because after the first wave in March that ended in like July, it was much better in London, but in the north it was much worse. And in the north, we were still having problems with lots of people, particularly around Newcastle and Leeds and Manchester. And there were some really big, what do they call them? Like little epidemics, little circles of infections happening around Leicester and Bradford and places basically in the middle of the country. So that we were all kind of having that. And then London was kind of okay. And then it got much worse in December, London. And that's when everything closed. We had this tier system, and they went into the top tier that everyone was terrified. And anyway, now we're all in it.
Yeah. Top 4, tier 4, something
tier
like
4, yeah.
Tier 5, they were thinking about going. Yeah, and so theaters in there, arts venues in Newcastle, they closed since last year, and they have not opened at all then.
I think so. They might have been open for a little bit for random things, but I think there's no point, because financially they're not going to get any money in. So there's very little reason. Now, theatres are open for closed for rehearsals and stuff. That's still happening. And for instance, one of the things that I'm working on at the moment is a show in Bristol, which is being developed at the moment. And so I'm there as part of the R&D. And so I'm going there in person to do that. But that's because we can get in a big space with only a couple of people. Like there's basically us two and one person in a massive building, and that's it. And we have to be really careful and everything. But so that's still happening, and some people have still got stuff going on, which is great. But public performances aren't happening, and because that's obviously the way that theatres get their money, that means that they can't then support artists, and the whole thing falls apart. So even though some places in London were able to open because they had the money to be able to just kind of pump into it, outside of London, that wasn't really possible. So they kind of just stayed closed.
Oh, no. And those people who are developing shows, are they thinking of presenting it online, or perhaps when theaters open?
Well, in the case of the stuff that I'm working on, it's for preparation for when theatres can open again. And I think quite a few theatre companies are just producing work, preparing work and developing work now, so that when stuff opens, they can be like, hey, I've got this show. They can be like, I can do this work, and it's easy and it's ready to go. But then there's a whole other part of theatre making, which is saying, let's make stuff for live stream and for online performance, and rather than just waiting until that's going.
And at this point, how do you feel about online performances?
Conflicted. I have lots of views about online performances. I think in general, as a medium, as an idea, the idea of doing something online where especially live is really good and really powerful, and also is not new. People have been doing that for a long time. Mm-hmm. The problem is that a lot of particularly theatre makers, but also DJs, but basically theatre makers and DJs tend to be the ones who make these mistakes, which is that they're doing it for themselves. These theatre makers are basically like, I'm going to create a performance of theatre because theatre is really important. You must love theatre. Let's go to the theatre. And actually, like, not that many people care about theatre. Theatre is not actually important in terms of like, it's not as important as like paramedics. and also in terms of when you're at home, the contract that you have between audience and performer is totally different, because there's no risk involved. Because if I'm just, let's say I'm watching like a live, even like a really good live stream, like from National Theatre or something, I can just turn it off whenever I want. I can just turn it off. I can pause it. I can speak over it. I can just go and watch Netflix. I can go watch something that's got like a billion times higher production value and has got, you know, like much better actors and much, you know, and I'm not saying that because I believe that something that has more money is better, but that's what the contract is really like when you're kind of doing this live performance. One of the things that I like about theatre is the structure is basically locking people in a room for an hour and then they can't do anything about it, which means that you can build things up gradually and kind of introduce things and, you know, you can work with that. Whereas when they can just click away, it's lost. There's no risk. There's nothing. So the stuff, and obviously because I come from a sort of I'm a sound artist and I come from a kind of sound orientated sort of perspective. For me, it's all about how to create, how to adapt a listening environment in a way that is as good as adapting a listening environment in theatre, because you have to think about that so much when you're like, you know, okay, so we're doing a performance. Are they really just hearing it through these little laptop speakers? Like, it sounds rubbish. It's been recorded on my little laptop speakers in some big room where two people are like, alas po Yorick. And then on the other side, it's being heard through some laptop speakers. So you just hear like tinny, terrible sound quality, and you can't feel immersed. You can't feel in there. So I'd say that one of my biggest problems with these live stream performances is that they think too much about themselves and don't think enough about the audience and the listener.
Yeah, that is amazing. You made some really amazing points, actually. I was talking about this with my partner as well. I was just talking about how going to the theater is a completely like different experience as watching a film, because you are in a room, as you say. And then he said something very particular. He said, but there's also this smell. You know, they have really loud sounds as well. So they have all of these things that I think are very important and that cannot be replicated on a screen, of course. I know that, as you say, like a lot of shows, you can go on Netflix, you can go on Disney Plus and watch these amazing shows and get blown up by all these special effects. It is. I don't know.
I feel like if it's not face to face, then it's got to be something else. It's got to be something new and different. And I actually really haven't seen anyone do anything that's particularly interesting. Me either. I haven't done it, but like, but just. That's particularly like really engages with the thing, because I don't know, there's something, it's just crap. Like watching, everyone knows we're in lockdown. So obviously when you want to watch something, you got to forget that they're just in their bedroom and they've been in their bedroom for 11 months. And you know that they're trying desperately to pretend that they're in like 15th century, you know, France or whatever. Yeah. I don't know, like it kind of needs to be something completely mad and new and abstract, right? Like, but no, I did see quite a nice Christmas Carol version, because it was by a company in the States who use a lot of projections, and they use lots of overhead projectors, like old school projectors, and conventional digital projectors and lots of stuff. And so it worked really well because their whole thing was always about screens, and it was always about like, what layers can we put on top of screens? So then they just did that like times itself, and they just did it again, and they just had all of these screens on top of it, but then on top of the screens that you were obviously watching it through, and that made more sense. But that's such a specific thing, just because they're working with screens, that it kind of works. But yeah, otherwise, I don't know. It's really hard to replicate that feeling of face to face and real performance.
Yeah, I would say it's a bit difficult for a person, an audience member at home, to watch theater online on the screen. I would say that. I would agree with that. But then, I mean, let's go back to these R&Ds that are happening right now. Are they being funded by the government?
I mean, some will be, some won't be. I guess there's Yeah, there's, I think in general, people, obviously artists have never had money. Organizations, it's weird because some organizations have had a lot of money and a lot of support, and suddenly they don't have to pay people anymore. So they've actually got quite a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And so some organizations are able to pay for development and stuff like that. Arts Council is obviously this other beast because the Arts Council is kind of the government and kind of not the government. The government support, half of it goes through more or less through the Arts Council, and the other thing is kind of separate funds. Everyone supposedly is able to get the kind of basic furlough and the self-employment support, but in reality, there's loads of people who have missed out on it. So a lot of the projects, some of them are just being made just for free, as they kind of always have been, I suppose. But now it's even worse because you don't have any other jobs to bring it up. And then other ones, the Arts Council has started doing project grants again in September, something like that. September, October is when they opened up again for project grants, which meant that by November or December, you had loads of people suddenly like, I've got a project, I've suddenly got a thing, and everyone suddenly tried to do everything. Yeah. Okay. So there is stuff happening, which is good.
So you're telling me that some of these people who are developing these projects don't have anything. Maybe they have the theater venue that they go to as in kind, I guess. Are the theaters just offering their space for people to go and sit down and talk about making something?
Yeah, I mean, with my something I'm not involved organizationally, but in something that I'm involved with, they've got a theater to just give them a month-long residency because the theater's not doing anything.
Yeah.
So they've just been like, well, come here, just be in the space for a month. So yeah, like obviously that's lucky people who are able to get that. But yeah. I think they're trying where they can to support people, theaters, but
yeah. And how are theaters surviving? Theater venues, are they receiving money from the government?
Yes, there is a coronavirus sort of hardship package for businesses, which theaters are eligible for. And I think generally, so the way that the government went to support theatre or like arts practitioners generally was this idea of a kind of trickle down. Like instead of supporting the grassroots, instead of supporting the artists, they were like, okay, from the top here, we'll support the organization, the big organizations, because then they'll support the smaller organizations and charities, and they'll support the artists. In reality, that trickle down stuff doesn't really work. Things are lost along the way. And so it means that a lot of people don't have the support, but it means that a lot of theatres have remained open. More theatres have remained open than you think would have. So that is a good thing, because it means that obviously trying to start a new theatre from scratch is really expensive. So, and it's good that, there's theatres that otherwise would probably have been sold for the flats and stuff like that. So being able to have these things still survive, even if that money isn't going anywhere, is probably helpful. But there's been a lot of restructuring within theatres. It's not just the freelance staff who've suffered. The people in the theatres have also had a hard time. There's been lots of redundancies, so where people get fired essentially. And there's lots of restructuring within these things, whether they've been like, okay, we need to adapt to being less specialized, so we have smaller team members, or we need to cut down this department, or we can't afford to keep this, or whatever it might be, or we need to do fewer productions a year, and some of that is positive, I suppose, because it's like giving them a space to restructure. For instance, around here in Newcastle, there's a very small theatre called Alphabeti Theatre, who does basically a little fringe theatre, very open to anything. And they've just basically spent the past year changing their entire policy from having what they call a revolving door policy, where anyone can come in and do some work, to being like, actually, we're just going to do some proper co-production, pay as you feel, guaranteed fee stuff for theatre makers, which is amazing, because that's exactly what we don't have at the moment. And that's because of the time and probably the money that's been afforded to them to be able to offer that. But then on the other hand, there are people who are just saving costs, and they're just cutting people, and they're just making people redundant, and they're just using this as an opportunity to sort of shave off the people that they didn't want. So
just some shady business in there.
Yeah, super shady. There's a lot of it.
Although it's pretty difficult because now theaters don't have money. I mean, if they didn't have a lot of money before, now they have nothing.
Yeah, they're not like, theaters aren't like the rich.
So what do they have to do? And you mentioned French theaters, how they're working as a co-production, and how the production team gets half the money, the theater gets half the money. But then you also mentioned freelancers, how freelancers were not getting support money from the government as well. And I think that I don't know much about it, so I just want you to sort of like explain this to me, because I really don't know much about it. But I know that in the end, at like maybe November, December, something like that, they started receiving some money from the government, some support, a furlough scheme, I think. I'm not too sure.
So the furlough scheme, there's two. The furlough scheme is the main bit of government support, and the idea is that if I have say I work at a cafe or something, and the cafe's closed because we're on lockdown, I work 30 hours a week and I get £10 an hour or whatever, and so that means I earn whatever, 300 quid a week, and I'm like, blah, blah. Basically, what the government is saying is that in order for the cafe to not have to fire you, so the cafe can keep you employed, the government will pay 80% of your wages. And so those 80%, and the cafe doesn't have to pay anything else. So the cafe doesn't lose any money, basically. The government pays those wages. And obviously that's pretty revolutionary in terms of like social support. This is something that Britain hasn't really seen since maybe the mid 40s, when we kind of like, began the NHS and did all these kind of movements to social welfare and stuff. So it's a really big thing and it's welcome from quite a right-wing government to have actually done this, as opposed to somewhere like the United States, which is just I mean, fucking what the hell is going on?
Forgot about everyone.
Yeah, they were like, nah, it'll probably go away. But yeah, so but the problem is that there are people who are left out of this stuff. So firstly, the furlough thing applied only to the people who were on regular contracts, what here is known as pay as you earn contracts. So it's ones where you're just like, okay, I work in a cafe, you get 30 hours a week or whatever. But the people who are like, say, like one of my gigs was to work as a casual theatre technician. I wouldn't be on the books as such. They would just say, oh, Javier, I need you to come in for 5 hours and climb a ladder. And I'd be like, oh, okay, cool. And then they'd pay me, and then I'd pay my tax off of that, and I'd do my own things, being self-employed. I didn't have anything because I wasn't part of the payroll. Now they then introduced this thing called SICE, the Self-Employment Income Support Scheme. And that was meant to be our equivalent of furlough. And I've received an amount of that. Again, 80%. It's a bit weird because it's 80% of what you've earned of an average of the last 3 years. So it's kind of not quite the same. And for some people, that'll be good if they've had a bad year. And for some people, it'll be bad. Like it was not great for me because the year before that, I earned way more than I had 3 years ago. And so my average was down. But some people that just happens, right? But again, people were left out of this. So for instance, my partner, who she was working full time and then became self-employed, didn't qualify for this thing because she was only recently self-employed. Whereas somewhere like someone who had been working full time at a theatre or something would have been getting all of their pay, and someone who'd been working for 3 years on self-employment would have got 80% of what they earned. So there's this gap of people who haven't been supported. There's another gap with people who'd to become like limited companies, have started their own little business. And if they'd just done it then, they also missed out on any support. The numbers change, but there's a group called Excluded UK, so excludeduk.org, I think, that lists that about 3 million, I think, have missed out, not just arts workers, but about 3 million people have missed out on what they should be owed in terms of the benefits from this. So it's a good chunk of people. And of course, those are people, some of whom have lost, especially in London, have had to pay loads and loads of money for rent. They wouldn't then, it wasn't allowed to evict people, but now it is. There was no rent control in London. Suddenly all the jobs had stopped. The job market outside, the ones that are still working, were just flooded, and it was really, really hard to get a job anywhere else. And so it's mad. And then they didn't get any support for it. And overnight it all changed. So yeah, it was, it's not been great.
Oh my God. That is a lot of people. And are freelancers still receiving this furlough money?
The last one I got was in December. And they were like, we'll let you know when the next one is.
All right. So
yeah, but that's the same. They're pretty much the same with the furlough as well. I mean, the furlough is much more planned, whereas the self-employment one is kind of, you just get a message from the government saying, hey, you want to come and get some money? But if you don't get it, then that's it.
Yeah. Jesus, that's pretty deep. That's so hard. They're basically just telling you, well, I don't know if we're going to give you any more money. So just maybe find something else to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty
Which is why everyone got so annoyed about that whole thing that went around with the reskilling, and Fatima's next job could be in cyber and all of that. People, everyone was really upset about that, because you're just like, well, it wouldn't have to be if you'd given us the fucking support,
Oh my God, that became such a big meme. I saw it all over the place.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I just kept thinking about the meme because because it was like this ballet dancer that was just sitting there. Yeah. It's like, oh, like this girl is gonna reskill. She could be the next software developer, something like that.
Yeah, it was cybersecurity. Yeah.
Cybersecurity something. Yeah, but it just didn't work out.
I mean, the fact is that advert itself wasn't even from that time. It was just something that was left up on a website. And it was actually from a few years ago. But it then got viral because someone found it and was like, look at what the government is saying. And everyone was like, no.
But you can tell that people were so angry that the government was not helping them. So and that shows.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that was right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I actually remember what I was going to ask. Yes. So in the 2 weeks that some theaters opened in the UK, I know that they implemented this new technique of leaving 30 seats between audience members. Yeah. What do you think about that? Do you think that was good? I know as a producer perspective that we wouldn't have, filled enough seats to get some profit out of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, yeah. I mean, from a production and a sort of financial point of view, it's not a possible replacement for having a house that usually you kind of go on having quite a lot of people in a room anyway. Even in every sense, you want to go for 70% capacity minimum, really. Even in kind of little fringe weird things or whatever, things that don't really need it, the spacing out just doesn't work. You just don't get the amount. I never went to any of those gigs, so I don't know what it was like. I don't know if it was actually, I could see it being kind of all right. I could see it being kind of fun. In a really surreal way. And again, if someone's making performance in this time and is making performance that is able to be performed, and they're doing it like that, and they're engaging with the medium of that thing, then yeah, man, like, you know, you've got a unique point where suddenly everyone is forced to be apart, and everyone's breath is like tainted with evil, and you know, there's something really interesting performatively that you could do with that. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Obviously, it sounds shit, but then, but then I don't know. Maybe, you know, I think everything about this year has been shit. So maybe this is something better.
It's something. No, but it's shit money-wise. But I think creatively and in terms of intimacy, I think it sounds like a really cool idea. To just have a few people in the venue and just looking at this show, it becomes more personal.
I've done lots of shows with only like 4 people there anyway. So I'm fine.
Yeah, and it becomes more engaging for the person. I like those as well. Yeah. But anyway, now let's talk about you, what you're up to these days. What projects are you involved in?
What have I got? Well, yeah, so I've got this theatre sound design project thing. So working with a Bristol-based company called Mechanimal on a piece which we think is called Megalith, which is about copper mining and old kind of like Neolithic stone monuments and rituals and stuff. Yeah, it's very fun. We've got lots and lots of rocks that we're playing with and making sounds with and doing stuff. I'm there as a sound designer, I suppose, but also I'm kind of on stage kind of doing kind of live sound art Foley thing. So yeah, that's been really fun. I'm off tomorrow, in fact, to Bristol for a few weeks to work on it at the Pound Art Centre, which is just outside of Bristol. Yeah, and then apart from that, I've been very lucky to have got a grant from the Arts Council in early this year to support. It's called Developing Your Creative Practice, and it's all basically that. So it's giving you money to just kind of concentrate on upgrading your practice and working a bit more in detail. Well, for me, working more in detail with tech and looking at kind of like coding and live streaming in a much more advanced and sophisticated way, and somewhere where I can kind of look at creating audio plugins for other kind of softwares, and just generally going further down the kind of nerd hole of sound, with a view to creating performances at the end of it, I suppose.
That's really good. Is this something that anyone can apply for?
Yeah, there's, this next one is going for, basically the DYCP is something that happens in rounds, and it's open to anybody. It's separate from their more famous grant thing, which is called project grants, in the way that project grants is specifically for a project. It's specifically for like, okay, I want to develop this piece about whales or whatever it might be, and I want to rehearse here and do this and pay this person this and do this, and we can apply to the Arts Council to be able to do that. DYCP is more like, okay, I need to spend 2 months learning the piano. So I'm gonna do that, and I need some money to help me so it means I don't have to take other work, so I can just learn the piano, for instance.
Yeah. And then you specify what you're going to do and what lessons you're going to take in order to learn piano, and why it is important to learn piano for. Exactly.
Well, yeah, why the thing is going to benefit your practice in whatever way. And it's I mean, all Arts Council forms are long and kind of excruciating, but it's relatively easy to get your head around why it exists. Currently, they're open until I think the end of next week, so it's quite tight. But so until the 18th or something like that. But they happen regularly, so they say when they open up, and that's just all on the Arts Council website.
And a lot of people get some support from there, or just very small amount of people get it?
I think more people now than before. They've put in more money towards these ones, because they know that it's more likely that people need the money to carry on their practice than people who actually have projects to be able to go and do, especially in something like theatre or dance where you can't actually perform the thing. So I think there's quite a lot of them. They opened for 3 rounds this time, so that was quite a lot of money that's going into it. The maximum you can apply for is £10,000. The minimum is 1,000. So they're really very much for you to kind of have however long it might be, or do whatever research process you need to do. Because it could be, I want to have some piano lessons, but it could also be like, I want to go into the wilderness and live there and do sound recordings and whatever. Like anything that kind of is basically like, I want to do this and I'm not able to do it without £4,000 or whatever it might be.
But going into the forest to do some work, that sounds like a very good idea.
Yes,
I think I'm gonna steal that. But yeah, I mean, and how do you see the panorama now for this year? Do you think it's gonna be a bit more relaxed in terms of lockdowns and pandemics?
Oh, I think it's still gonna be weird and horrible, to be honest. I don't see it getting, I guess maybe, I hope that this year we might have some artists and organizations supporting them that create some quite challenging and new ways of kind of presenting work. But at the same time, I think everyone's so looking forward to when this isn't the case, that people don't want to be creating work that's just for this. They're just like, let me just create work where I can go and touch someone else's face, and I'm just going to wait a year until I can actually touch someone else's face to do it. So I don't know, maybe it won't work, but hopefully, I mean, in terms of the UK, one of the really good things that we have going at the moment is that the vaccine is being rolled out very well. And I think as of now, it's something like 15% of people have had the vaccine or something like that. So we're doing it very quickly. And that's basically because we haven't given it to a private company to screw up like we usually do, but we're actually giving it to the NHS. So hopefully, if that means that if everyone is basically safe, we'll probably still have to close borders and it won't be normal, but maybe arts can kind of function and kind of start building up its own thing towards the end of the year or something.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, this is the end of our conversation. Oh no, sad face. But I don't know. But I don't know if you want to give our listeners a little bit of some words of hope, some goodbyes. Like things are gonna be better one day. The vaccine is gonna save us all.
I think fundamentally every shit thing stops being shit after a bit. and I think even when it isn't, you can kind of play in the shit and maybe through the shit pick up bits of shit and make like a really nice collage or something. And that's basically what I think the arts needs to do. And I think everyone can do that, right? Yeah. Everyone can play with shit. So that's what we need.
Yeah.
Is that hopeful enough?
That is hopeful enough. That is wise enough. I think I love it. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Javier, for being in this program. We're going to be back with more episodes very soon. So stay tuned. Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Remember that we need to keep the conversation open, so leave your ideas, thoughts, and everything in the comment section below. And remember that we have more episodes on this YouTube channel, so make sure you check them out. See you next time.